The first thing my mother said after 9 years wasn't, "I'm sorry." It wasn't, "I missed you." She looked past me, glanced at my house, and said, "You owe this family. It's time you helped your brother." I stood there frozen. 9 years without a phone call. 9 years without a birthday card. 9 years after they disowned me for marrying the man I loved. And somehow, she still believed she had the right to make demands. She had absolutely no idea that before she left my porch, she would hear a truth she'd spent nearly a decade trying to ignore. My name is Emily. I'm 37 years old, and 9 years ago, I married the kindest man I'd ever met. His name is Marcus. He's black. To me, that was one small part of who he was. To my family, it became the only thing they could see. I met Marcus at a community health clinic where we both volunteered on weekends. I worked as a physical therapist, and he was a pediatric nurse. The first thing I noticed about him wasn't his appearance. It was how every frightened child smiled the moment he walked into the room. He had this calm voice that made people feel safe. 3 years later, he proposed during a picnic by the lake where we'd had our first date. I cried before I even answered. "Yes," I whispered. It should have been the happiest season of my life. Instead, it became the beginning of the worst year I'd ever lived. When I told my parents, my mother, Linda, went completely silent. My father stood up from the dinner table. "I hope you're joking." "I'm not." Dad looked at Marcus's picture on my phone for less than 2 seconds. Then he pushed the phone away. There are plenty of nice men in this town. I didn't fall in love with plenty of nice men. Mom finally spoke. "Think about what people will say." I laughed because I honestly thought she was kidding. She wasn't. Over the next several weeks, they invited me to dinner almost every night. Not because they wanted to know Marcus. Because they wanted to convince me to leave him. Dad said, "Marriage is hard enough without making life more complicated." Mom whispered, "Your children won't fit in anywhere." My older brother, Adam, didn't even pretend to hide his opinion. "You're throwing your life away." Every conversation ended the same way. I defended Marcus. They criticized him without ever meeting him. Then one Sunday afternoon, I brought Marcus to my parents' house. I believed that if they spent even 1 hour with him, everything would change. I couldn't have been more wrong. Marcus walked in carrying flowers for my mother. She never accepted them. Dad refused to shake his hand. Adam barely looked at him. Dinner lasted exactly 26 minutes. Then Dad stood up. "If you marry him," he said calmly, "don't come back." The room became painfully quiet. I waited for someone to disagree. Nobody did. Marcus reached for my hand under the table. I squeezed it tightly. Then I stood. "I guess this is goodbye." Mom didn't cry. She didn't hug me. She simply looked away. That was the last time I saw any of them. The wedding happened 3 months later. Marcus's family welcomed me with open arms. His mother cried while helping me into my dress. His father hugged me after the ceremony and whispered, "You're our daughter now." It felt wonderful. It also broke my heart. Because strangers had shown me more acceptance than my own parents. But that wasn't the worst part. A year after the wedding, I gave birth to our daughter, Ava. She had Marcus's warm brown eyes and my stubborn smile. I mailed birth announcements to my parents. Every single one came back unopened. When our son Noah was born 3 years later, I didn't send another announcement. I had finally accepted the truth. Some people choose pride over love. Life moved on. Marcus and I worked hard. We bought a modest home. Started a children's therapy center together. Built a beautiful life. Not a perfect one. But an honest one. Every anniversary, I wondered if my parents ever thought about me. Every Christmas, I hoped my phone might ring. It never did. I thought it was finally over. Then everything changed. One rainy Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on our front door. When I opened it, my mother was standing there. She looked older, smaller, more tired. For one impossible second, I imagined she had come to apologize. Instead, she said, "Can I come in?" Marcus quietly took the kids upstairs. I invited her into the living room. She looked around our home. "You've done well." I nodded. Neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Your brother needs help." I blinked. "What?" "Adam's business failed." She looked at me as though the next words were obvious. "He needs a loan." I honestly thought I'd misunderstood. "You haven't spoken to me in 9 years. We're family." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. I stopped being family the day I married Marcus. She looked uncomfortable. That was different. No. It wasn't. She avoided my eyes. People change. I looked at her carefully. Did they? She couldn't answer. Instead, she quietly placed a folder on my coffee table. Inside were Adam's debts. Almost $280,000. She expected me to rescue the same brother who had called my husband a mistake. I gently closed the folder. "I'm sorry." Her expression hardened. "So that's it? You disowned me. You chose him." "I chose love." Silence filled the room. Then she whispered something that caught me completely off guard. "Your father doesn't know I'm here." I frowned. "What?" "He's dying." The words hit me like a truck. I forgot my anger for a moment. "What happened?" "Heart failure." I sat there in complete silence. Part of me wanted to run to the hospital. Another part remembered every cruel word he'd ever spoken. Mom quietly wiped away a tear. "He still refuses to admit he was wrong." That sentence hurt more than anything else. Not because I expected an apology. Because after all these years, he still cared more about his pride than his daughter. Then everything changed again. Later that evening, Marcus came downstairs after putting the kids to bed. He asked softly, "How are you feeling?" "I don't know." He sat beside me. "You know something?" "What?" "If my parents had treated you that way." He smiled sadly. "I would have forgiven them a long time ago." I looked at him. "But I wouldn't let them use me." That single sentence cleared my mind. The next morning, I visited the hospital. Dad looked weak. Older than I remembered. When he opened his eyes and saw me, he looked shocked. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, I said, "Mom came to see me." He closed his eyes. I told her not to. I wasn't sure what that meant. Then he surprised me. "I don't want your money." I stared at him. "I never asked for it." He slowly nodded. "I know." His voice cracked. "I asked her not to contact you." I frowned. "What?" Tears filled his eyes. "I found out 6 months ago." "Found out what?" He looked directly at me. "That I was wrong." I couldn't breathe. He continued slowly. "Your cousin Michael volunteers at your therapy center." I blinked. "He never told you?" I shook my head. He showed me pictures. Pictures of Marcus helping disabled children. Pictures of Ava winning her spelling bee. Pictures of Noah hugging his grandfather from Marcus's side of the family. Dad swallowed hard. I realized I missed 9 years. I sat there crying silently. I kept waiting for the perfect time to call. There isn't one. I know. Then he whispered the words I'd dreamed about hearing. "I'm sorry." Not because society had changed. Not because people pressured him. Because regret had finally become heavier than pride. When I left the hospital, I still refused to pay Adam's debts. Those belonged to him. Actions have consequences. But I didn't refuse my father. Over the next several weeks, Marcus and I brought the children to visit him. The first time Dad met Ava, she climbed into his lap with a coloring book. She had no idea he had once rejected her before she was even born. Children don't inherit hate. Adults teach it. Dad cried almost every visit. Not because he was sick. Because he understood exactly what his prejudice had cost him. Adam never apologized. Instead, he blamed everyone else for his problems. Mom continued making excuses for him. Eventually, I realized something important. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I forgave my brother. I simply chose not to trust him. My father passed away 4 months later. At the funeral, people spoke about his generosity, his work ethic, and his love for family. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't mention the years we lost. I spoke about the weeks we found. Because even though they were far too short, they were real. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether I regret marrying Marcus. I smile every single time. Not for 1 second. Because marrying him didn't destroy my family. It revealed who they already were. Love didn't divide us. Prejudice did. The greatest revenge wasn't becoming successful. It wasn't watching the people who rejected me struggle. The greatest revenge was building a home filled with the very love they said would never last. My children are growing up knowing they never have to earn love by looking a certain way or fitting someone else's expectations. And if there's one lesson this journey taught me, it's this. The people who truly love you won't ask you to choose between your happiness and their approval. If they do, choose your happiness. Because the right family, whether you're born into it or build it yourself, will never make you apologize for loving the right person.